Hello family, welcome to Stories with Jville. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and remember to turn on the post notifications so you don't miss any future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Now sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Victoria Adams was only 18 when she met David Adams, a charming and ambitious university student. Lagos, with its bustling streets and endless opportunities, seemed like the perfect backdrop for their blossoming love. David was everything Victoria thought she wanted: handsome, charismatic, and full of dreams. He swept her off her feet with promises of a bright future together, and she believed every word he said. Their romance was intense and passionate, the kind that made Victoria feel like they were invincible. She was young and full of hope, imagining a life where their love would conquer all obstacles. But life had other plans. When Victoria discovered she was pregnant with their first child, Daniel, her world turned upside down. She confided in David, who, to her relief, seemed ready to face the challenge with her. Victoria's parents, however, were not as understanding. They were furious, feeling she had thrown away her potential for a boy with big dreams but little stability. Her father, in particular, made it clear she was no longer welcome in their home. Heartbroken but determined to stand by David, Victoria moved into his tiny student apartment in Lagos. Living together in the cramped room was anything but romantic. Victoria worked tirelessly to make ends meet while David focused on his studies. She took on multiple jobs, cleaning houses, selling snacks, and doing laundry for her neighbors. Each day was a struggle, but Victoria believed it was worth it for the sake of their love and their future family. David, for his part, seemed grateful but increasingly distant. He often spoke of his dreams of becoming a successful entrepreneur, and Victoria was his biggest cheerleader. She didn't mind sacrificing her own comfort if it meant helping him achieve his goals. She believed their love would make everything worthwhile. However, cracks began to show in their relationship. David's charm and ambition masked a selfish streak that Victoria chose to ignore. She convinced herself that his long hours away were for their future, even as she shouldered most of the responsibilities at home. When Victoria became pregnant with their second child, Amelia, she was filled with mixed emotions. She was excited to grow their family, but also worried about how they would manage. She assumed David shared her concerns, but she was wrong. Just weeks before Amelia's birth, David delivered the ultimate betrayal. One evening, she returned home to find a letter on the table. In it, David confessed that he couldn't continue their life together. He had left Lagos for his NYSC posting, abandoning her and their unborn child. Victoria was devastated. Her dreams of a happy family crumbled in an instant. Alone and 8 months pregnant, she realized she had no choice but to pick herself up and move forward. Tears streamed down her face as she held Daniel close, vowing to be both mother and father to her children. This was not the life she had envisioned, but Victoria was determined to survive for herself and for her children. The days following David's departure were the darkest of Victoria's life. Alone and heavily pregnant, she found herself struggling to make sense of the betrayal. Lagos, once a city of promise and hope, now felt cold and unwelcoming. Yet, as much as she wanted to collapse under the weight of her despair, she had no choice but to carry on. Her children needed her, and she was determined to give them the best life she could manage. With little money and no family support, Victoria moved into a tiny rundown apartment on the outskirts of Lagos. The single room had peeling paint, a leaky roof, and barely enough space for her belongings. Still, it was a roof over their heads, and for that she was grateful. Victoria gave birth to Amelia in that small apartment, surrounded only by the sounds of the bustling streets outside. There were no loved ones to hold her hand or celebrate the new life she had brought into the world. Despite the loneliness, as she cradled her newborn daughter and saw Daniel's curious face peering over the edge of the bed, Victoria felt a flicker of hope. She promised herself that she would make this work no matter what it took. Her days quickly fell into a grueling routine. Victoria started a small cleaning business, offering her services to local families and offices. She woke up before dawn to prepare Daniel for the day, carried Amelia on her back, and scrubbed floors, washed clothes, and cleaned windows until her hands were raw. By evening, she was exhausted, but the sight of her children smiling and healthy gave her the strength to keep going. Daniel, a bright and observant child, often tried to help his mother. He would pick up toys, fold small pieces of laundry, or hold Amelia's bottle when Victoria's hands were full. "Don't worry, Mommy," he'd say with a toothy grin. "I'll help you." Those small gestures were a balm to her weary heart. Amelia, though just a baby, brought laughter into their tiny home with her bubbly giggles and wide, curious eyes. Even in her toughest moments, Victoria found joy in watching her children grow. Despite their struggles, Victoria made sure her children felt loved and secure. She told them bedtime stories, sang lullabies, and celebrated every little milestone with enthusiasm. Their modest life was filled with love and laughter, even when money was tight. Her cleaning business began to grow slowly but steadily. She gained a reputation for being reliable and hardworking, and her clients recommended her to others. With every new job, Victoria felt a small spark of pride. She was doing it, building a life for her family, one step at a time. Lagos remained a challenging place to navigate, but Victoria was learning how to thrive in its chaos. Though she still bore the scars of David's betrayal, she was no longer the young, naive girl who had depended on him. She was a mother, a fighter, and she would stop at nothing to ensure her children's future. Years passed, and Victoria had carved out a modest but fulfilling life for herself and her children in Lagos. Daniel was now a bright teenager, excelling in school, and Amelia, a spirited 10-year-old, had discovered her love for music, often humming tunes and practicing with her school choir. The small apartment, though humble, was filled with laughter and warmth. Victoria had managed to grow her cleaning business into a steady source of income, enough to provide for her children and keep their lives stable. Life wasn't easy, but Victoria found solace in the family she had built. Every milestone, every report card, every small success was a victory. She had long buried the pain of David's betrayal, focusing all her energy on her children and their future. But the past has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. One evening, while Victoria was preparing dinner, a knock came at the door. Amelia, ever curious, ran to answer it. Standing there, dressed in a sharp suit and leaning against an expensive car parked outside, was David. Victoria froze as the memories of their past came rushing back. Her mind raced with questions. Why now? What did he want? And most importantly, how dare he show up after all these years? "Victoria," he said smoothly, his tone betraying no hint of guilt. "It's been a long time." Daniel, hearing the commotion, came to the door and stared at the man he barely remembered. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "I'm your father," David replied, smiling as if his absence had been nothing more than a brief inconvenience. Victoria's stomach churned as she struggled to maintain her composure. She didn't want to cause a scene in front of her children, but the sight of David standing there, looking so successful and self-assured, filled her with a mix of anger and pain. Over the next few days, David began inserting himself into their lives. He lavished Daniel and Amelia with gifts, expensive gadgets, designer clothes, and promises of trips to places they had only dreamed of. At first, the children were hesitant, but the allure of their father's wealth quickly drew them in. Victoria watched helplessly as her children started spending more time with David. Daniel, who had always been her rock, began questioning her decisions and blaming her for their modest lifestyle. Amelia, dazzled by the promises of a life filled with luxury, started to pull away emotionally. David's reappearance disrupted the fragile balance Victoria had worked so hard to create. She felt powerless as her children, who had once been her greatest allies, began slipping through her fingers. But Victoria was not one to give up easily. Deep down, she knew that David's wealth and charm were temporary distractions, while her love and sacrifices were eternal. As the cracks in their family deepened, she resolved to fight for her children, not with material things, but with the unshakable bond of a mother's love. The weeks following David's return were some of the most challenging Victoria had faced in years. She felt like an outsider in her own family as her children gravitated toward their father, enchanted by the luxuries he offered. For years, she had been their everything, their provider, protector, and source of unconditional love. Now she watched as David undermined all that she had built with his charm and wealth. Daniel, once her steadfast ally, began questioning her decisions. "Mom, why didn't you let us have more? Dad says we deserve better," he blurted out one evening. The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She turned away, hiding the tears that threatened to spill, and forced herself to stay calm. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice trembling, "everything I've done has been for you and your sister. I'm sorry if it hasn't been enough, but I've done my best." But Daniel, emboldened by his newfound connection with his father, rolled his eyes and stormed out of the room. Amelia, meanwhile, was becoming distant in her own way. The bubbly, cheerful girl who used to sing to Victoria while she cooked now spent hours texting on her new phone, a gift from David, or gushing about the fancy restaurants he had taken them to. Victoria felt her heart breaking into pieces. She knew David's generosity wasn't about love, it was about control. He had abandoned them when they needed him most, and now he was trying to win their loyalty with money. She wanted to scream, to remind her children of all the nights she had stayed up working, all the sacrifices she had made to give them a life filled with love and security. But she held back, not wanting to drive them further away. In her moments of despair, Victoria turned to her best friend, Grace. Over cups of tea in Grace's cozy living room, she poured out her frustrations. "It's like I'm losing them, Grace," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "They don't see what he's doing. They think he's some kind of hero, swooping in to save the day." Grace reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're their mother, Vicky. No one can take that away. It might not seem like it now, but they'll realize the truth. You just have to hold on." Bolstered by Grace's words, Victoria resolved to stay strong. She refused to let David's manipulations define her relationship with her children. She began spending more quality time with them, cooking their favorite meals, helping with homework, and listening to their dreams. Still, the pain of their shifting loyalty lingered. Victoria cried herself to sleep many nights, praying for the strength to endure. She knew that love, not wealth, would ultimately win her children's hearts. But as David's influence grew stronger, she wondered if that day would come soon enough. David's charm and wealth seemed impenetrable to Daniel and Amelia, but Victoria began to notice the cracks beneath his polished exterior. While he dazzled his children with material gifts and grand promises, his actions often didn't match his words. Subtly and carefully, Victoria began to expose the truth to her children. One day, Daniel came home frustrated. "Mom," he said, tossing his backpack on the couch, "Dad promised to pick me up after school to show me his new office, but he didn't show up." "I waited for over an hour," Victoria sighed, suppressing the urge to say, "I told you so." Instead, she gently replied, "I'm sorry that happened, Daniel. Sometimes people don't keep their promises, but I hope you know I'll always be here for you." Her words seemed to hang in the air, and Daniel didn't respond, but she could tell he was thinking about it. Small instances like this became more frequent. David, despite his efforts to appear like a doting father, often prioritized his work and social life over his children. Amelia, too, began to notice his inconsistencies. One evening, she sat at the dining table with her mother, absently playing with her food. "Mom," she began hesitantly, "Dad said he'd come to my choir performance tomorrow, but do you think he will?" Victoria paused, choosing her words carefully. "I hope he does, Amelia, but whether he's there or not, I'll be in the front row, cheering you on." Amelia gave a small smile, her trust in her mother shining through. The performance came and went, and as expected, David didn't show up. Amelia sang her heart out, locking eyes with Victoria in the audience, drawing strength from her unwavering presence. As the children's faith in their father wavered, Victoria saw an opportunity to remind them of the values she had worked so hard to instill. She began involving them in her daily routines, teaching Daniel how to cook simple meals, letting Amelia help with small tasks in her cleaning business, and sharing stories about her journey as a single mother. One evening, as they gathered around the small kitchen table, Victoria shared a story about the early days after David left. "I used to walk miles just to find work," she told them. "It was hard, but every time I felt like giving up, I thought about you too. You gave me strength." Daniel and Amelia listened intently, their eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and admiration. For the first time, they seemed to truly understand the sacrifices their mother had made for them. Meanwhile, David's carefully constructed image continued to crumble. One day, Daniel overheard a heated phone conversation between his father and a business associate. The charming man he admired suddenly seemed cold and calculating, more interested in profits than people. Slowly but surely, the illusion was breaking. Victoria's quiet strength and unwavering love began to outshine David's wealth, planting seeds of doubt in her children's minds. They were starting to see the truth, and it was only a matter of time before they would fully embrace the mother who had always been there for them. The moment everything changed came unexpectedly, during one of Daniel's soccer matches. Victoria had always been there, cheering loudly from the sidelines, but this time David had promised to show up. He had even assured Daniel he'd bring him a new pair of premium soccer boots to use in the game. The match was tense, with Daniel playing his heart out, looking toward the sidelines at every pause, hoping to spot his father. Victoria watched him, her heart breaking as she saw the disappointment grow on his face with every passing minute. The game ended, and Daniel trudged off the field, his head hanging low. David had never shown up. Victoria wrapped her arms around her son, whispering, "You played amazingly, Daniel. I'm so proud of you." But Daniel pulled away, his voice sharp. "You don't understand, Mom," he promised. "He said he'd be here." Victoria hesitated, then said gently, "I know it hurts, Daniel. Sometimes people make promises they can't keep, but that doesn't mean you're not important. You're incredible, with or without his approval." Daniel's face crumpled and he burst into tears. For the first time, he allowed himself to see the truth. His father's presence was inconsistent and his promises were hollow. Victoria held him close, letting him cry as years of disappointment poured out. Meanwhile, Amelia had her own turning point. Her school choir had been selected to perform at a prestigious event in Lagos, and she was ecstatic. Victoria beamed with pride as Amelia practiced her solo performance every night, her sweet voice filling their small apartment. David, true to form, had promised to attend the event and even bragged about bringing VIP guests. The night of the performance, Victoria arrived early, securing a seat in the front row. Amelia glanced nervously at the audience, scanning for her father. When it became clear that he wasn't coming, she turned her gaze to her mother, who smiled and gave her an encouraging nod. Amelia sang her heart out, her voice filled with raw emotion. The audience erupted in applause, and Victoria rose to her feet, clapping the loudest. Afterward, Amelia ran into her mother's arms, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I needed him to be here, but I didn't," she said quietly. "You're all I need, Mom." That night, Daniel and Amelia sat with Victoria in their cozy living room. For the first time, they truly listened as she shared her struggles and sacrifices over the years. She didn't speak with bitterness or blame, but with honesty and love. "I never wanted you to feel like you were missing out," Victoria said softly. "Everything I've done has been for you, and I'm so proud of the people you're becoming." Daniel took his mother's hand, his voice filled with regret. "We see it now, Mom. We see you, and we are so sorry." From that moment, the bond between Victoria and her children grew stronger than ever. David's influence began to fade, replaced by the quiet strength of a mother's unwavering love. Victoria had won their hearts back, not with money or promises, but with the truth of her devotion. In the weeks following their emotional breakthroughs, Victoria's home was filled with a renewed sense of warmth and unity. Daniel and Amelia, once enamored by their father's wealth and charm, now saw their mother in a new light. They began to understand the depth of her sacrifices, and their appreciation for her grew immensely. Daniel became more involved in helping his mother with her cleaning business. On weekends, he accompanied her to job sites, assisting with heavier tasks. Victoria often caught him observing her in quiet moments, as though he were trying to comprehend how she had managed to carry so much on her shoulders for so long. "Mom," he said one afternoon as they finished the job, "I don't know how you did all this. You're the strongest person I know." Victoria smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I did it because I had you and your sister. You're my strength, Daniel." Amelia, on the other hand, found ways to express her gratitude through music. She wrote a song dedicated to her mother, practicing it late into the night. One evening, she performed it for Victoria and Daniel in their small living room. Her voice was steady, filled with emotion as she sang about love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. When she finished, Victoria's eyes brimmed with tears. "That was beautiful, Amelia," she said, pulling her daughter into a hug. "You have a gift, and I'm so proud of you." David, meanwhile, noticed the shift in his children's attitudes. His attempts to draw them back with gifts and grand gestures began to fall flat. They were no longer dazzled by his material wealth and saw through the veneer of his promises. One evening, David invited Daniel and Amelia to dinner at a high-end restaurant. They reluctantly agreed, but the atmosphere was tense. As David talked about his latest business ventures, Daniel interrupted him. "Do you ever think about what you left behind, Dad?" Daniel's voice was calm but firm. "About what Mom had to go through after you left us." David faltered, caught off guard by the directness of the question. "I've done my best to make up for it," he said defensively. Daniel shook his head. "Money doesn't make up for abandoning your family. Mom never gave up on us. She deserves more than you could ever give her." Amelia nodded in agreement, her expression resolute. "You can't buy love, Dad. We see that now." Back at home, Daniel and Amelia shared the conversation with their mother. Victoria listened quietly, her heart heavy with a mix of emotions. She had long given up on expecting anything from David, but hearing her children defend her so passionately brought her a sense of closure. "I'm proud of you both," she said, holding their hands. "You've grown into incredible people, and that's all I ever wanted." Victoria knew that their family, though broken in some ways, was stronger than ever. Together, they were rebuilding trust, healing old wounds, and creating a future filled with hope and love. With the emotional wounds between Victoria and her children beginning to heal, their home became a place of newfound harmony. The sense of understanding and unity that had grown between them made their modest apartment feel warmer and more vibrant than ever before. Daniel, now 17, had stepped into a more mature role within the family. He took on part-time tutoring jobs to contribute financially and often surprised Victoria by cooking dinner on her busier days. "It's the least I can do, Mom," he'd say with a sheepish grin. Amelia, inspired by her mother's resilience, became more vocal about her dreams of pursuing music professionally. She'd spend hours practicing her singing, and her performances at school events earned her recognition. One evening, after a particularly successful concert, she returned home clutching a certificate of excellence. "This for you, Mom," she said, handing it to Victoria with a proud smile. "I couldn't have done it without you." Victoria framed the certificate and placed it in their small living room, a symbol of the family's perseverance and triumph over adversity. David, meanwhile, continued to fade into the background of their lives. His occasional attempts to reconnect felt increasingly hollow. He'd offer gifts or invite the children to fancy outings, but Daniel and Amelia began declining more often. Their priorities had shifted. They valued the deep, unwavering love of their mother over the superficial attention their father provided. One weekend, David showed up unannounced at Victoria's apartment, hoping to see the children. "I just want to talk," he said, his voice unusually subdued. Victoria hesitated but allowed him in. Daniel and Amelia sat silently as David fumbled through an apology, his words lacking the sincerity they had hoped for. "You don't get it, do you, Dad?" Daniel finally said, his tone calm but firm. "It's not about the words or the gifts. It's about being there when we needed you. Mom didn't just show up," she stayed. "She's the one who taught us what love really means." David looked away, his confidence visibly shaken. Amelia chimed in, her voice steady. "You left, Dad, and it hurt, but we're okay now because we have Mom. She's enough." After David left, the family gathered in the living room. Victoria felt an overwhelming sense of pride in her children. They had grown into compassionate, wise young adults, despite the challenges they had faced. That evening, they shared a quiet dinner, laughing and reminiscing about better times. Amelia hummed a tune as Daniel recounted a funny story from school, and Victoria watched them with a smile, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. Her sacrifices had not been in vain. Through their shared struggles, they had built something unshakable, a bond that no outside influence could ever break. For the first time in years, Victoria felt truly at peace. Together, they had not only survived but thrived, finding strength in unity and love. Their journey was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever came next as a family. With the tension of David's intermittent appearances easing, Victoria and her children found a rhythm that suited their growing family. The once fractured bonds had healed, and their collective focus was now on building a brighter future. Daniel, now in his final year of secondary school, began preparing for university entrance exams. His dream of studying engineering was becoming a reality, and he often sought Victoria's advice on his career aspirations. "Mom, I want to make you proud," he said one evening as they reviewed his practice test results. Victoria smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've already made me proud, Daniel. Whatever you do, just remember to be kind and work hard. The rest will follow." Meanwhile, Amelia's passion for music blossomed further. After winning a scholarship to attend a prestigious music academy in Lagos, she spent her weekends learning from some of the best instructors in the city. Her voice grew stronger, her confidence brighter, and her ambitions clearer. Victoria continued to expand her cleaning business, earning more clients and even hiring a small team to help with the workload. With steady income and a supportive family, she began to dream of bigger things, not just for her children, but for herself. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Daniel shared some surprising news. "Mom, Dad called me today," he began cautiously. "He said he wants to take us on a weekend trip. Just the three of us." The room fell silent as Victoria processed his words. Amelia looked at her mother, her expression unreadable. "What did you say?" Victoria finally asked. "I told him I'd think about it," Daniel replied, his tone measured. "But honestly, Mom, I don't think I want to go. I don't need a trip or fancy things to know where I belong. I already have everything I need here." Victoria's eyes welled up with tears as she reached across the table to hold his hand. "Thank you for saying that, Daniel. But if you ever want to spend time with him, I'll understand." "He's still your father," Amelia chimed in, her voice firm. "We're good, Mom. You're all we need." The conversation marked a turning point in their family dynamic. Victoria no longer felt like she was competing for her children's love. Instead, she saw their loyalty and appreciation for all she had done. The shadows of David's betrayal began to fade, replaced by the warmth of the life they had built together. As the weeks passed, Victoria found herself letting go of the bitterness she had carried for so long. She realized that holding on to the pain of the past would only hinder the future she was working so hard to create. One Sunday after church, Victoria took her children to a quiet park in Lagos. They sat under a large tree, enjoying the cool breeze and each other's company. "We've come a long way," she said, looking at Daniel and Amelia with pride. "And I know there's so much more ahead for us." Together, Daniel and Amelia smiled, nodding in agreement. They were a team, a family, and nothing could ever break that bond again. The days turned into months, and the small family of three began to thrive in ways Victoria had only dared to dream about. Their modest apartment in Lagos no longer felt like a reminder of hardship, but rather a testament to their resilience and love. Together, they had created a sanctuary filled with laughter, hope, and unwavering support for one another. Daniel's university acceptance letter arrived one sunny morning, sparking an eruption of joy in their home. He had been admitted to study engineering at one of Nigeria's top universities, a dream he had nurtured for years. Victoria held the letter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You've done it, my son." "You've made us all so proud," Daniel beamed, his pride tempered by humility. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You showed me what it means to work hard and never give up." Amelia, now fully immersed in her music academy, was preparing for her first major performance at a public event. The academy had recognized her immense talent and chosen her to sing a solo at the Lagos State Cultural Festival. The excitement in her voice was palpable as she shared the news with her family. "Mom, Daniel, you have to come. This is the biggest moment of my life." Victoria and Daniel promised to be there, and on the day of the performance, they sat in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else in the audience. Amelia's voice soared, captivating everyone in the crowd. She sang with passion, her words carrying the weight of her family's journey. When she finished, the applause was deafening. After the performance, Amelia ran to her mother and brother, throwing her arms around them. "This is for us," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "We did this together." Meanwhile, Victoria's cleaning business had grown into a small enterprise. With her hard-earned savings, she was able to move the family into a slightly larger home, a simple but beautiful place that reflected their progress. The new house symbolized a fresh start, free from the shadows of the past. One evening, as they unpacked boxes in their new living room, Victoria took a moment to reflect. "We've been through so much," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "But every challenge brought us here. I wouldn't trade any of it for the world." Daniel nodded. "You taught us what it means to fight for what matters, Mom." "We're stronger because of you," Amelia smiled, picking up her guitar. "And now it's time to celebrate." She began strumming a cheerful tune, and the family laughed and sang together, filling their new home with joy. As the sun set over Lagos, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, Victoria stood by the window, watching her children. They were happy, thriving, and full of promise. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of peace. The pain of the past no longer defined her. What mattered was the love that had carried them through, the bond that held them together, and the future that lay ahead. Together, they had overcome the trials of their journey and emerged stronger than ever. It was truly a new dawn. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.